Good evening, everyone. My name is Hannah Deacon. I'm the director of the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, and tonight you've joined us for the A to Z of medical cannabis in the UK. I'm just going to do some brief slides about the society and also about MedCann support, which is one of the groups that has supported this evening. And then we'll go on to our talks. So yeah, I'm Hannah Deacon. So the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society is basically a practical support group for clinicians, prescribing clinicians and non-prescribing clinicians, but also allied health workers such as pharmacists, paramedics, nurses, anyone that works within a clinical setting that wants to know more about medical cannabis. We have great peer support and networking groups. We have events, training, practical guides to get started on the website. We're really hoping we can do some face-to-face events soon because we've missed them. We have licensed product information and experts prescribing guidelines, support 24/7 through our Google groups. We can't guarantee we'll be replying at 4 in the morning, but you can send anytime an email, and we do have international members, so it's likely that you will get a reply quite quickly. And we've got a searchable evidence hub, which is coming soon, which is really exciting. So if anyone is watching that is a clinician or an allied health worker that would like to join, please go to our website and you can join through the Join Now page. I just want to talk very briefly about MedCann support as well. It's an advocacy, education and support group created by a parent called Matt Hughes, who has a child with epilepsy. And it's basically a central hub for parents, carers, patients who want to be educated about medical cannabis, especially for use of epilepsy. We've done lots of webinars, there's links. If you go to the website, there's some really good information that's been got together about all the clinics available in the UK about medical cannabis, so you can learn as much as you can before you're going to see your doctor, for example. There's lots about the CBD industry. We're pushing with MedCann and the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society to look at transparency of products and look at lab analysis and things like that. And as I've said, there's clinics and products available on that website too. So again, if there's any parents and carers watching that wants to get more support with regard to medical cannabis, then please do join MedCann support. That's the group that helps run MedCann support. We've got obviously myself and Matt Hughes, Dr. Callie Seaman, Dr. Danny Gordon, Jade Proudman and Bonnie Goldstein. So it's a really nice group of people. So firstly, I just want to say thank you very much to the Jamaican Medical Cannabis Corporation for supporting this event tonight. Also to the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, MedCann support, and Dr. Evan Lewis, who has been a wonderful support and helped create these roundtables for us. So thank you. And also thank you to Kate Thorpe, our communications director, who's put a lot of this event together as well. So thank you very much to her. I'll allow everyone to introduce themselves because it's probably best for them to do that rather than me. So firstly, this evening, Professor Mike Barnes is going to talk to you about the history of cannabis, what is cannabis, and the endocannabinoid system. And I'll allow him just to introduce himself first before he starts. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Hannah. If I need to, good evening, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen and I'll go through a little bit. Let me get that sorted first of all. Share. There we go. Slideshow from beginning. It takes a couple of seconds to work. And then the screen goes blank, which puts everyone off. End of slideshow, it says. Well, that was quick. Thank you very much, everybody. I don't know quite why that was. Let me go back. Go back in again. Share. Okay, I'll stop sharing and start again. I'll try and do two things at once, which is difficult as a male, but I'll do my best to go back in and start at the beginning here, and then we'll see if we can do that again. I am a neurologist, and I talked the last couple of weeks. We've had these seminars, so that has been very good, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Tonight is obviously focused more on patients and parents and families. So I hope that's going to be entertaining for you. Right, we'll try it again. Slideshow from beginning. Come on. Start slideshow from beginning. Oh, yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I decided this worked, did it not, 5 minutes ago, everybody? So I have no idea what to do now.
Just try again, it's fine, don't panic.
No, I'm not panicking at all. I'm not, no panic is involved.
No panicking allowed.
Share.
It's there.
It's there. Can you see that?
Yeah.
I'll try once more. If not, I'll just go from just use it without the slideshow view. But we'll try it. We'll move to something else. Slideshow from beginning. We'll try once more. No, I don't know what it's doing. Right, we'll do it from this screen. Such is life. Right, I'll just move down like that. Okay, we'll just do that. So it's not in the slideshow view, but you can see the slides. You can have the advantage to see what's coming next, so you can remain even more excited than you would have been otherwise. So the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society is, tonight I'm going to do a little bit about the Drug Science Project 2021 program, which is relevant to some of the potential consumers and patients and families. So I mention that as the talk goes on. I'm going to start off with just a brief introduction to medical cannabis, because I know some of you on the talk will know a lot about it, and some of you perhaps will know less about it. Obviously, all of you will have heard of cannabis, clearly, and its medical value. So I'm going to hopefully put that a bit into context tonight and explain what we know about it, what we don't know about it, what's good about it, what are some of the side effects and some of the problems. This will take about half an hour. But first, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the history, only 5 minutes on the history, because it's a fascinating history. It'd be nice to do a whole talk on the history at some point, but there's not room for tonight. So I just wanted to make the point that cannabis is actually the first medicine described by man over 5,000 years ago. So some people say, well, this is a modern medicine, we don't know much about it. It's complete nonsense. It started and was described over 5,000 years ago. The origins were in China, but very soon it spread to India, eastwards into more Southeast Asia, but then more particularly westwards in towards the Middle East and into the Middle Eastern cultures and the Greek and Roman empires. And in the 15th, 16th century, it crossed the Atlantic to the United States, Canada, and South America. But it has a very noble history, really. It was a very much an accepted medicine up to really the last 70 years. So it's got a 5,000-year history, and it's if you like, its demonization, if I can put it like that, is much more recent in the scheme of things. So it's a long-standing medicine we know quite a lot about, and even though it might be apocryphal, but it's a nice story that Queen Victoria used medical cannabis to ease menstrual and childbirth pain, because we know for certain her personal physician, J. Russell Reynolds, advocated widespread use of cannabis in healthcare journals around the late 19th century. So, no, it's totally accepted. Here's some of its advertisements in the US as it happens. The 1850s, 1940s, cannabis was a very popular ingredient in modern medicines. In the early 1920s, American doctors wrote 3 million prescriptions for cannabis every year. So it was more than a popular medicine in the early days. But then around the late 1920s, it began to go a bit out of fashion. It went out of fashion for two reasons. First, because it was the pharmaceutical industry was beginning to be born around those times, and it became more fashionable, I think is the right word, for the pharma industry to use pharmaceuticals, and botanicals, which was the foundation of medicine up to that point, was seen to be yesterday's news, gone out of fashion. But on the same time, there was this very unpleasant, it was an anti-Black and anti-Mexican, very racist, unpleasant campaign organized largely by this guy in this bullet point here called Harry Anslinger. That's an interesting tale because prohibition in the US was finishing around that time. Harry's department was being reduced in size and in budget. He wanted to find something else to keep his influence going, because he was beginning to compete with the new FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and J. Edgar Hoover. So he came out with an anti-cannabis campaign based on no scientific relevance, I have to say. But it was a very successful campaign, promoted also by the newspaper magnate at the time called J. Randolph Hearst. it's factual. It's not me being slightly anti-pharmaceutical or anything like that. It's a factual campaign that was pushed by Harry Anslinger. And then, of course, as the years and decades went by, it became popular to demonize it further. And Nixon launched the official war on drugs in 1968. There was international political pressure to begin to ban cannabis, mainly from the UN Single Convention on Drugs, which was 1961. It was added into the range of banned drugs then, alongside heroin and cocaine and such like. And the signatures to the UN Convention had to then sign up to their own in-country regulations, that in the UK resulted in 1971 the Misuse of Drugs Act, where cannabis was placed in Schedule 1, which meant by definition it had no medicinal value. So it was dismissed on no basis, because that was absolutely untrue. We know now, and we certainly knew then that that wasn't true, but it was placed in the Schedule 1. And it's only in November 2018 that it was taken out of Schedule 1 for certain specific circumstances for doctors to allow to prescribe it from Schedule 2 of the Misuse of Drugs regulations. And every country in the world, except 4, I think, have their own particular misuse of drugs regulations, which were, up to recently, responsible for not allowing the prescription of cannabis. In the last 30 years now, I mean, it's more so in the last 10 or even in the last 5, there's been a change across the globe. The first country to legalize the medical use of cannabis was actually Uruguay, which is a fascinating country. I looked it up today, and it won the World Cup in 1930. It was the first country actually to give a free laptop to every school child. And another interesting fact is that it's 95% renewable energy in Uruguay, and it has the longest national anthem in the world. So that's my little sales pitch sponsored by the Uruguay Tourist Agency. But what they did in the late 1990s was to change the law in Uruguay. And it still is. You can see the little blue speck in South America where it's legal. Cannabis as a whole is legal. That was followed by Israel, then in 2004 by the Netherlands, Italy, Canada, Australia, and of course it's still legal for medical purposes and legal for recreational purposes in I think the majority of the US states now. I think it's about 34 of the US states. Overall, there's now 50 countries worldwide that allow cannabis use in various shapes or forms, decriminalized or tolerated or totally legal. And there's now many tens of thousands, millions really of patients benefiting from cannabis worldwide. And to put that into context, there's 164 million as the latest figure of people who use cannabis every day on this planet. And roughly a third of those use it for medical purposes and the other 2/3 for recreational purposes. So obviously there's an overlap between the two. So it's widespread use and a long-standing history, and we know a lot about it. There's no other medicine in the world that we know more about in terms of its safety profile. So those anti-cannabis campaigners who say, well, we don't know enough about it yet. I was at the Health Select Committee in London about 2 years ago, House of Commons, where somebody said, well, we don't know much about it yet. It could be the next thalidomide, which, is complete nonsense, because 164 million people over centuries of use, we would know that by now. Anyway, that's very briefly a little bit of historical description. So what is cannabis? It's and I know Kelly is going to talk a little about this, but cannabis comes in different varieties. Let's call them varieties for the moment. It's a flowering plant: Cannabis sativa, Cannabis indica, and Cannabis ruderalis. It has 147 known cannabinoids. I think it's the latest number, and we've all heard of THC, the one that gets you psychoactive, the one that gets you high, the one that gets you intoxicated is perhaps a better word, and CBD, which doesn't do so, and CBD is widely used in medical practice, often with some THC. The plant also contains a number of other minor cannabinoids, the other 145, and terpenes, which I'll come to in a moment, which give cannabis its smell and also add to medical qualities, and flavonoids, which give it its color, but also have medical properties. So let's just very, very briefly look at the main components you all know. THC, the intoxicating compound, And then street cannabis, it's designed to be high in THC because people buy it in order to get high, basically. But we shouldn't forget that THC has really remarkable pain-killing properties, anti-sickness properties, anti-inflammatory properties, and muscle relaxant properties. It's a very useful medicine in its own right, ignoring its recreational use. CBD is the non-intoxicating compound, and that also has very useful medical properties in its own right. It's anti-anxiety, particularly. It's anticonvulsant. The little children with epilepsy who benefit from cannabis. It's mainly, not totally, but mainly the CBD component that they respond to. But as I said already, we shouldn't forget terpenes, which help the entourage effect. I'm going to pass over that quite quickly because Kelly's going to talk about that. But the terpenes that give cannabis its smell also have medical properties. And we shouldn't forget, just briefly, the other so-called minor cannabinoids, which aren't really minor, because these are just examples. I'm not going to go through those in detail. These also give cannabis its total overall effect. And recently in the UK, some of you will remember, there was a problem of getting MedCann product into the country. And some people, I'm sure, trying to be helpful, said, well, we can replicate MedCann with the same ratio of THC and CBD, which is true. But what they miss out on, what they didn't perhaps understand or want to understand, was actually each individual strain, each individual company making the strains will have slightly different components as other minor cannabinoids and terpenes, and it's all those other components that give the overall effect. So the same ratio may not work in one child for epilepsy, let's take an example, whereas the same ratio does work in another child. That's almost certainly the only thing it can be is due to the background minor cannabinoids and terpenes that are contained within the different products. So we shouldn't forget the minor cannabinoids, and I would totally support the work that MedCann with the society hopefully will do in the coming few weeks to make these minor cannabinoids and terpenes more open, so we can begin to see what is in all the medicines and understand it a little more. So there's 2,500 plus different strains. This is just one of them, Valentine X. You can see the highlighting THC CBD ratios. This is a fairly high CBD variety, but it also has these other minor cannabinoids in it to varying degrees, and that's what you need to take into account. This is, of course, a flower, and a lot of the people will use cannabis oils, but flowers are also widely used. About 2/3 of the prescriptions in the clinics are for flower, mainly for pain, but not totally, but mainly for pain, and oil for the others. Here's another one called Purple Candy. This is a high THC one, but again, just look at the minor cannabinoids, CBN, CBC, CBG, in this particular variety, which adds to its overall medical effects. Briefly, CBD, as some of you will know, is legal in the UK to sell over the counter at outlets like Holland & Barrett. Other pharmacists are available too. And you can sell CBD products if they're grown from a plant that will produce less than 0.2% by weight of THC, but more particularly has less than 1 milligram of THC per container. Which if you think about it, that's totally logical. It depends on the size of the container, but that's not the law. It's 1 milligram per container. It's a little bit fraught, this area, because it's not marketed as a medicine. The retailers can't make any medical claims. Sometimes what's on the label is not what's in the tin, as it were. And it does need a bit of more regulation. I think it's gone a bit over the top recently because of the novel foods regulations that some of you may have heard about, which I think will take some of these products off the shelf, sadly, because some really good products amongst the really bad products. But nevertheless, we shouldn't forget that over-the-counter CBD can have medical value. Although when you get it from hemp, it's largely CBD and not much else, so it hasn't got that richness of the full plant. There's a couple of products in the UK that are licensed medicines, and we shouldn't forget that full spectrum, which Kelly will talk about, cannabis is an unlicensed medicine, and the licensed medicines are both by GW Pharma, Sativex for muscle spasticity and MS, and Epidiolex for children epilepsy with Dravet and Lennox-Gastaut and tuberous sclerosis. And there's one of the synthetic THC called Nabilone to complete the picture. People sometimes confuse between recreational cannabis and medical cannabis, and it's the same plant. Some people say there's no difference, it's the same plant. Well, it is the same plant, but what we tend to do Well, first of all, recreational cannabis by definition is not regulated, so you don't quite know what you're getting. It's illegal in the UK, at least, to possess it. There's severe penalties for possessing it, but you don't know what's in it, because you don't get the dealer on the street corner giving you a certificate of analysis with the product. Generally speaking, some do, in fairness. But generally not. So it could be contaminated with all sorts of things. Whereas medical cannabis is certainly a purer product. It's made under what's called GMP, Good Manufacturing Practice Standards. So it has a reliability and a consistency. And of course, the aim of medical cannabis is not to get you high. So what doctors would generally do is prescribe a product that has CBD in it, sometimes very high in CBD, which doesn't get you high, and more particularly, it counteracts the high that you get from THC. So when you're prescribing a medical product, you can get high from very high THC products for pain, but generally speaking, you don't, because it's counteracted by the CBD. So that's a big difference. So you want to remember there is a difference in practical terms between medical cannabis prescribed by a doctor or obtained on over the counter with CBD and recreational street cannabis. What we mainly prescribe in the UK, though, as I say, is about 60% flower, but about the other 40%, there's a bit of overlap. Some people get both oil, mainly for putting under the tongue. If you can, it's better absorption under the tongue. Patients using cannabis for a whole variety of symptoms now, about 60% are for pain, as I said earlier, 20% or so for anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other psychiatric or mental health problems. About 10% or so for neurological issues such as MS and epilepsy, of course, and then 10% for other things such as gastrointestinal disorders and cancer. There's some evidence that cannabis can help cancer, but not really robust evidence, but it can certainly help cancer symptoms like pain and sleep and appetite and anxiety. So it's used for a whole variety of issues. Sadly, in the UK, it's really only privately available at the moment. There's only 3 NHS prescriptions. So you have to go, sadly, to a specialist cannabis clinic. And of course, that adds to the cost to the patient. They shouldn't be paying anything because it should be free on the NHS. It's legal to be free on the NHS, but doctors, for various reasons, are not yet prescribing it on the NHS. But there is a movement called Project 21, an excellent project by Drug Science, which is an excellent organization. And if you're on that project, you can, for these conditions that you see there, 7 of them, including now epilepsy as of very recently, you can get cannabis on medical prescription for, we won't bore you with the exact details, but it's about £150 per month for prescription, which is much less than the normal cost. And that's a lot of money for the people, but it's much more affordable than it used to be. And we'd love to see the costs coming down. So if the NHS is not going to play ball yet a while, at least it becomes pretty well affordable for a lot of people. How does it work? Very briefly, cannabis largely, not totally, but works through what's called the body's own endocannabinoid system. And I won't try and go through that in detail, but we all in our bodies have what are called cannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2, in the brain, in the spinal cord, in all throughout the body, in the guts, in the heart, in the bladder, the immune, particularly the immune system. But the body also produces called ligands, they're called anandamide and 2-AG, that bind to those receptors and put an overarching control of all bodily functions. The endocannabinoid system is a really important controller of all bodily functions, but sadly not really taught in medical schools. And very briefly, what does it do other than controlling everything? It particularly has a role in memory, in increasing appetite. It's anti-inflammatory for overcoming inflammatory conditions. It's analgesic. It controls temperature. It promotes sleep. It has a role in the control of our motor functions, how we walk, and it's called spasticity. It can help reduce that. It has a role in developing neurons, so-called neurogenesis. It has a role in neuroplasticity, that's adapting the brain after it's damaged. It reduces bladder tone, it reduces motility and inflammation in the gut, it has a role in female reproduction, and has a controlling function on proliferative cell responses. So it has an anti-cancer role. So it has a remarkable range of things. That's the natural endocannabinoid system. And the cannabis phytocannabinoids in THC, CBD, which we just described, largely work through that system. They do work through other receptors as well, but they're largely through that endocannabinoid system. The evidence base is, can cannabis be helpful? is that I think there's absolutely no doubt now that there's good, solid academic evidence for cannabis working in at least 5 conditions. That's unarguable. Even the most cynical person about looking at cannabis will accept that there's good evidence for cannabis being a painkiller in chronic pain, helping muscle spasm in spasticity after stroke or in multiple sclerosis, for example. Really good at nausea and vomiting, particularly in chemotherapy patients. It's very good anti-anxiety, that's largely but not exclusively CBD. And it's very good for epilepsy, all epilepsy, but some of the media is more focused on children with epilepsy. And that's, again, largely but not exclusively CBD. There's a little less evidence, but still reasonably good for helping conditions like fibromyalgia, sleep problems, PTSD, stimulate appetite, for example, in cancer or HIV. And there's some evidence it helps other things like aspects of Parkinson's disease, Tourette's, bladder dysfunction. So there's an awful lot of evidence emerging, and there's been the evidence on cannabis has doubled in the last 4 years. So now it's available worldwide. Scientists, doctors, researchers are really working on cannabis and producing a lot more evidence of its usefulness. Obviously, any doctor prescribing needs to know, does it work? Yes, it does in certain circumstances, but is it safe? That's a key. And cannabis generally is really, really safe. The side effects, such as they are troublesome in some people, are mainly linked to THC. The higher the THC, the more the side effects. CBD does have side effects, but most people, it has very, very few. It's very, very safe. THC is also safe, but it can cause more side effects, such as dizziness, the 4 Ds, dizziness, dry mouth, disorientation. And as usual, when you're talking, you forget what the 4th thing is. So I just carry on. Dizziness, dry mouth, disorientation, and it'll come to me in due course. It also increases the pulse rate, so palpitations. So we shouldn't be using it for people with active psychosis or schizophrenia, mania perhaps, or particularly also medical conditions, heart conditions that don't benefit from increasing the heart rate. It generally, though, mixes with pretty well all medicines you're taking, some exceptions, such as some anti-epilepsy drugs and warfarin, a blood thinner, a couple of other things you should be careful about, chlorpromazine, theophylline for asthma. But pretty well, it's not, of course, it's not totally safe. No medicine is totally safe, but it's pretty safe if it's used sensibly and carefully by a doctor who knows what they're doing. So in the UK, what's legal, who it helps, and how can we access it? Well, just briefly, what led to the UK's change in law in November 18 was largely the campaign by Hannah, who's chairing us tonight. There she is, with other parents from what's called the End Our Pain campaign, who campaigned largely for their children. So it's mainly children with epilepsy that changed the law. But of course, we shouldn't forget that they count, important as they account for less than 5% of the total number of people who are helped by cannabis. These were the campaigners that changed the law in November 2018, and on that day, Sajid Javid, who was then the Home Secretary, stood up and said he'd listened to the media, and he'd changed the law so cannabis moved from Schedule 1 of the Misuse of Drugs Regulations, which I mentioned earlier, to Schedule 2. We thought that was a great day, and it was a great day. We thought that's the end of it. I can retire now, put my feet up, but that didn't prove to be the case, because then the NHS decided, and various senior medical bodies decided that they didn't want to use it, particularly people like the Royal College of Physicians came out against using it for pain, and the British Pediatric Neurology Association came out against using it for epilepsy. And I think that's appalling, and I've said so, and I keep saying so, and I will keep campaigning with other doctors to get the doctors in the NHS to prescribe this medicine. Not perfect, a lot more we need to know about it, but let's use it for those who otherwise have no choice but to put up with epilepsy, put up with pain, put up with chronic anxiety. So, as I said before, at the moment, sadly, the only way you can access this is privately. You can try with the NHS, and I would encourage you to do so. Go to your NHS, go to your specialist, go to your GP and say, I want this medicine. So I think a patient-driven revolution is going to be useful, because this has really been a patient-driven change of the law. But if you want it now, as it were, the only real way to get it is through a medical cannabis clinic, and there's a directory there. If you look on the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society website, you can find a clinic and you can contact one of the clinics. And then if it was the clinic that's associated with Drug Science Project 21, look at that website there. And you can see about Project 2021 that I mentioned briefly, and that's a way of getting, for some conditions, the medicine a little bit cheaper than otherwise would be the case. So I would encourage you to do that. So why isn't it available? I think I've said that already. It's because really of restrictive guidelines produced by NICE, particularly in other medical bodies. And just to say, Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society is producing new guidelines. The 3rd edition is coming out. I saw the draft today, but it's already got a draft on the website for doctors and anyone else to read. And I think they're more balanced and useful guidelines than those that are currently out, which are restricting its use. So let's have a look at just 3 examples of real people across the UK benefiting from this. And one is known to you, Hannah's son, Alfie. And Hannah doesn't mind me, hopefully, talking about Alfie, although it's a little bit awkward as she's sat there looking at me. But, you know, it's a wonderful, it really was a wonderful story, the story that changed the law. Alfie had his first seizure at 8 months, serious clusters of seizures. He had hundreds of seizures a month from a rare condition called PCDH19. He only responded to steroids. You know, he was admitted to hospital, I think, Hannah, 48 times in a year before his prescription. Hannah and her family went to Netherlands, got medical cannabis. It took 6 weeks to work. And we shouldn't forget, sometimes these drugs do take a while to work. And then he went, basically, to cut a very long story short, he went without seizures for about a year. Hannah fought a very good campaign to get him back into the country using it, and he was the first to get a permanent cannabis license in the UK in summer 18, preceding the law change. And other than a brief period when some seizures returned, he's now been seizure-free again, thank goodness, for about 9 months, Hannah, I think, isn't it now? Yeah. That's a great story. And there are many other children who've followed in his little footsteps and have similar really wonderful stories about how cannabis can help rare drug-resistant epilepsy. Here's Lucy. They've given me permission to share these. And I don't know if Lucy's online tonight, but Lucy briefly has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome with severe pain, joint dislocations, muscle spasms, digestive issues. She's undergone all sorts of surgeries from a young age, from 20 years onwards. Really zombified, as it says there, from pain medication during her teenage years. And now on cannabis, she is now finally able to taper off fentanyl when she was 19, having been on opiates from 12 after following the prescription of medical cannabis. And now she's accessing the Project 2021 program. And that's enabled Lucy to stop using a wheelchair, stop using opioids, study an undergraduate degree, and live a quality of life that she never imagined was possible, which is, again, a great story. And the last one is Sue. Chronic pain from secondary metastases from cancer since March 2020. She's been using CBD as one product called Bentralite to manage chronic pain particularly. And that's really also improved her quality of life enormously. She's on much less doses of other pain controlling medications now. As it says there, CBD oil allows me to enjoy a pain-free full life rather than a painful existence, enjoy walking. I used to struggle with walking a mile and limping, but now getting into a standing position is difficult. Without CBD, that's the case. With CBD, it makes a huge difference to her quality of life. Keep a positive attitude. It says there wonderfully, she refuses to dwell on how many years she'll live with cancer. I don't want to waste my life thinking about the day I'll die. I enjoy my life and intend to continue doing so, thanks at the moment to CBD oil. So thank you for Sue and Lucy and Hannah for letting us share those stories. Briefly, I've nearly finished, Hannah, in case you're panicking and I'm prattling on too long.
All right, for a few more minutes.
Frequently asked questions. I've got 3 more slides. People can see how many slides I've got now, so they're going to do it. The Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society has frequently asked questions. I would encourage you that's publicly available. You don't have to be a member to get that brochure. I hope that's the case. But all sorts of questions that some of which I've answered, some of which I haven't. My NHS doctor isn't supportive. What can I do? Can CBD I get over the counter work just as well, etc., etc. We can't address all these questions tonight. I hope I've covered some of them. But if you want further information on those questions, that's a very good booklet from the Society for you to look at. Other charities, I would encourage you to look at Drug Science as well. That's a great organization. I mentioned their 2021 program. Also, patients and families. There's PLEA, which advocates for quality of life for medicinal cannabis, patients to access their medicines free, etc. So PLEA is another organization, and of course, as Hannah mentioned earlier, MedCann support run by Hannah and Matt Hughes, I think is with us tonight, is also a very good organization, more focused, of course, on patients, families, consumers, if you like, medical consumers, rather than the health professionals. So that's a very good organization to support the patients and the families. Project 2020 I mentioned, and I've mentioned how to look at a medical cannabis clinic. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, that is me. So I hope that was helpful. It's a bit of a rush through everything, but I hope I've done it in time, and I hope that gives you at least some flavor of the richness and the usefulness and the safety of medical cannabis. Thank you very much. Sorry that the slides didn't show, but I think we managed.
We got there.
That's
fine. No panicking. Thank you, Mike. That was very interesting.
Okay.
We've now got Kelly Noreen.
Thank you.
Sorry, Kelly, I just need to unshare my, I don't know why I need to unshare my screen. Sorry. Yes, we've now got Kelly Noreen, who's a PhD in medical genetics. I'll let her introduce herself. If anyone wants to ask a question, we have got a Q&A session at the end with Dr. Evan Lewis and the other panelists. So please put your question in the Q&A section and we will go through the questions at the end. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Kelly.
Perfect. Thanks, Hannah. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here and speaking with you today. As Hannah mentioned, I have a PhD in medical genetics. That was mainly looking at mechanisms underlying cancer development. And then after that, I went into industry and back and forth to academia and industry over time, really looking at studying translational science, translational medicine pathways. So everything from basic science, preclinical models, all the way through to clinical trial and to patient outcomes. And that was in the areas of cardiovascular health, also again in oncology, and also in neuroscience and mental health. And so as it stands today, I am the Director of Medical Affairs at a company called Cardiol Therapeutics, which is a Canadian biotech pharmaceutical company that really studies the clinical development of products related to, as the name suggests, cardiology or cardiovascular disease. And we do have a product that we're studying in clinical trial, that is the CBD product. And I also have spent some time prior to this position with a Canadian licensed producer. So let me see if I can be more successful and get this computer to work to share this screen. Did that work okay?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So today I'll be talking to you about the plant all the way through to the different products. So just my disclosures, again, I mentioned employed by Cardiol Therapeutics, and I have shares in this company. I'm also an independent consultant for academia and also industry, and I don't have any conflicts of interest. So Mike talked about, the endocannabinoids and the endocannabinoid system, and also about phytocannabinoids. And I will speak a little bit about the phytocannabinoids today, as well as synthetic cannabinoids. So cannabis, so I'll talk about this a little bit with a little bit of a different direction from Mike. So he spoke about it being, a plant and all the properties of it. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the classification of it. And so really most people know these two main types of cannabis, sativa and indica. I won't mention ruderalis. And so really this is a historical informal classification. And so when you talk about this classification in plant science, it's not really, a formality, or it's not really scientifically proven. However, from historical classification, this is prominent in cannabinoid science, or the cannabinoid industry, or cannabis industry. And so, I will say that commonly sativas are described as taller plants with more narrow leaves and produce THC and also CBD. Indicas, as a plant are shorter and bushier and sometimes have wider leaves. And then hybrids have characteristics between those. And I will say that some patients report that indica plants and products lead to more sedating or relaxing effects, and sativa plants have more stimulating effects. This hasn't been shown, in broad scientific literature, but again, that's not to negate the patient experience, and that's really what this comes down to. And so when you're talking about naming products or plants or nomenclature, it's best to use cannabis sativa for all of them because it really speaks to the species of what it is. And then just another note on strain versus variety. So strain is really pervasive in the industry and when we're talking about cannabis in general, but really in plant science, strain is not used. And so strain is more on the biological side of things and more used for naming microorganisms and referring to microorganisms, and particularly viruses. So in plant science, we use variety to describe different cannabis varieties. One of those being hemp, which is also prominent. Mike spoke about this a little bit as well. So it's a variety of cannabis that's grown for the production of seeds, fiber, and CBD. In European regulations, to be characterized as hemp or industrial hemp. So it's grown for a specific purpose. THC content must be less than 0.2%. And in Canada and the USA, this content must be less than 0.3%. And Mike spoke about how this translated over to actual different products on sale and available in the UK. So the major cannabinoids, again, THC and CBD. Mike spoke about this in detail, so I won't go over this again, but the main difference is THC is intoxicating. CBD is not known to be intoxicating at medically relevant doses. And just a little bit about holistically, THC and CBD, and then other components of cannabis or hemp. Again, referring to Mike's slides on this, he mentioned terpenes, where cannabis gets its scent from, and also flavonoids, which I didn't include here just for simplicity, as well as other cannabinoids that are called minor cannabinoids. But again, the evidence and the science is emerging there on the utility of these other cannabinoids and how they may be helpful for healthcare and for treating different diseases and disorders. And so really when we're talking about this, there's a lot of discussion in the industry, but also emerging science around the entourage effect. And right now it is a hypothesis because of the fact that there isn't clear evidence one way or another. I mean, there's some emerging literature that just came out in the scientific published studies that talk about the fact that there is no entourage effect. And then similarly, there's a number of studies that say that it is a concept, it is real. And I think that in terms of broader scientific literature, there isn't a definitive answer. But again, that doesn't negate the patient experience and the effect that any product has on a patient's symptoms and symptom relief, and also their quality of life. And so this really plays into, the different products that are available and why a person, a patient, or a consumer may choose a different product. And so, going through this, there's all kinds of names and things out there, and it can be quite confusing. And so hopefully this can shed some light on that. So first off, we have a full spectrum product. So that's an extract, and it contains all components of the extract of the plant. And so as we spoke about, THC, CBD, terpenes, flavonoids, and other cannabinoids. So that's all in here in a full spectrum product. Then we have broad spectrum, so which sounds similar, but is different because it's also an extract, but it contains all the components, but it negates the THC, so it removes the THC. And this, to add more confusion, is also known as a distillate. And so you can hear those words used interchangeably to describe it. By contrast, we have an isolate, which is also an extract, but it is purified. And so it's really isolating one compound. It's usually CBD or THC. Those are the main ones right now. But again, it removes all of the other components of the plant extract and just keeps one. And then we have the synthetic products. So these are laboratory made, man-made, and they are usually a single compound. So there are some approved products, particularly in the US market, that are synthetic THC products. So the extraction process, how do you get a product? Really, there's three main ways. to extract all the components from the cannabis plant. So one is by carbon dioxide. And that, in the industry is known or believed to be a preferable extraction method for preserving terpenes, and also is said to be good for vaporized products. And then there's ethanol or alcohol extraction, which has been known to lead to extraction methods that are high speed and large scale extraction. And it's known or believed in the industry that this is good for distillate products. But I will say that both of these methods can be scaled quite large and can be quite quick, and also lead to products that have established terpene profiles and can be vaporized, or they're distillate products, they're oils and other distillate products. So they're both used in the industry. And then there's also hydrocarbon, so things like butane, and that's really for highly concentrated products. So on a larger scale, on a more macro level, what's the process of extraction? So you have your plant, and then obviously you're growing on a large scale, and then you harvest these plants, and then you extract the products from it from the methods I just spoke about. And then really the next step is to purify. And so depending on what you want as an end result, the product is purified to a level. So it might be that you want a full spectrum product, and I'm talking on the part of the manufacturer and the company that they want a full spectrum product, or a broad spectrum, or distillate, or something that's even more purified. And then the next step, ideally, should be testing of the product and really understanding what is in the final product. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. And all along this method, you have from plant to actual extract, you have a process called decarboxylation, which is a temperature change. And then it causes a chemical change in the product that really leads to the activation of the THC and the CBD. So from a precursor form to an active form, and that's really what decarboxylation is. And really the end product, I'll say this from an ideal standpoint, and this is what we require in Canada, is that companies have a certificate of analysis for their products. And this really is a quality document, and it really shows the product specifications. And so this is a product certificate of analysis that I just found on the internet. It's from an actual real company, because a lot of companies in Canada and sometimes in the US right now, they publish on their websites their certificates of analysis for their products, so that there's transparency in what is included in the product, so what the consumer, the patient, is actually taking. I think that's a really great practice, and it's mandated by our government as well. And so you may not get this on every batch of product or on every single product, but you can be assured that the testing process happens for final product, as well as some in-process testing as well. And so what this really shows is it shows the company name, who owns the product. It shows your cannabinoid test results, so looking at your total amount of THC, your total amount of CBD. Then it will also give a full cannabinoid profile here. So it has the amount of the so-called minor cannabinoids that are present in a product, and they may or may not be present, depending on the product. And then there's pesticide test results. So obviously we're talking about plants that are grown on large scale. And so there may be pesticides in there, and there's upper levels, there's thresholds for that. There's certainly acceptable ranges for that. In Canada, the threshold is 0. There has to be 0 pesticides in any product. And then over here, you can see the microbiological test results. So this is really yeast, mold, bacteria that may be present in a product at the finished stage. And really that makes sense, because you're talking about a living plant that's grown in soil. There might be microorganisms in it. And again, there's thresholds for this, and they obviously have to be very, very low in order to pass. But again, there's not consistent thresholds or criteria for this when you talk about different countries in the world. And then Over here are the terpene test results. So we spoke about that before. There may or may not be, you know, a different panel of terpenes. There are many in the cannabis plants. And so some of them may show up, some of them may not, and there's different amounts of each of these terpenes. And then finally, we have residual solvents. And so again, when we spoke about the different ways to extract, there may be some residual amounts of ethanol or methanol or butane in here. And again, these ideally should be non-detectable in a finished product. So cannabis-based products in the UK. So what is there? So in terms of CBD products, and Mike, feel free to jump in here if I don't have all the information or make a misstep, because I am not living in the UK. But as Mike mentioned before, there's a purified cannabidiol product that's called Epidiolex. That is a prescription medication. And then when we're talking about OTC, really we're talking about products that either are approved as novel foods or will be or should be shortly based on the new laws here. And so this is really meant to focus on the quality and reproducibility and of CBD products, but unfortunately that translates to some products not being available after a certain point of time. And so for companies that are producing products, CBD products here that are meant to be sold over the counter, they need to submit a fully validated novel food application by March 31st of 2021. And so this really means that only products that were on the market at the time of the announcement of this and have a validated application will be allowed to remain on the market. And so, you know, companies can continue to sell their CBD products during this, you know, transition period, but they have to be correctly labeled, they have to be safe, and they can't contain controlled substances. So, you know, there's a lot of nuance here, and this whole process is overseen by the Food Standards Agency. And, you know, as with anything as well, they give you a whole list of rules and then they talk about the exceptions. So the exceptions to this are cosmetics, vape products, products making medicinal claims, and products containing THC or other controlled substances. So another product that's available in the UK, it's been licensed by the MHRA, is Sativex. So this is a balanced product. So it's an extract from the cannabis plant, also made by GW Pharma, the makers of Epidiolex. And this one is to treat spasticity in adults with MS. And then just to round out the products, so for synthetic cannabinoids, there is one product that's available and licensed by the MHRA, and that is Nabilone, and the brand name is Sesamit, and that is to control chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. And so the active ingredient in this product is synthetic, and it's a chemical structure similar to THC. So it's very similar, but it's not exact. And so you can see there's some variation in some of these products that are synthetic, you know, similar to the variation you can see in products that are just extracted from plant. And just as a final note here, these are two other products, so Marinol and Syntrose. These are products that are approved by the FDA actually in the US, and they are on the market. And they both contain an active ingredient called dronabinol. And it's all very confusing. So I'll just be honest, I always get confused by all of these names like Nabilone, dronabinol, you know, Sesamit, all of these things. It's very hard to understand. And so I myself keep having to look up and make sure I understand and I'm straight on what they are. And so these products, again, I don't think these are available in the UK, but they have been approved by the US FDA. And they are synthetic THC, and they're really approved to treat those with HIV, AIDS, or cancer, to stimulate appetite, and also for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. And just a quick comment on cannabis-based products in Canada and the USA. So as Mike mentioned, you know, in October 2018, the Cannabis Act came into force into Canada. And prior to that, we had cannabis that was available for medical use only. And now cannabis is legal throughout the country. And so, but it is guided by very strict guidelines from our government. And so, you know, the Cannabis Act does allow THC and CBD products with limits on them to be purchased, you know, by individuals who are above the age of majority. So above 18 years, some provinces, it's 19 years. And then we also have a medical cannabis stream where it's prescribed or authorized by a licensed healthcare practitioner. And then in the US, there is, you know, I just went over this, so 1 CBD drug and then 3 cannabis related THC drug products that are approved, and they have to be, their use is guided by and governed by a prescription from a healthcare practitioner. And then of course the CBD product is Epidiolex. And then federally, the use of cannabis is illegal. It's not legal. So it's legal on a state level. So every state and territory has their own governing principles to it. And of course, they're not all the same either. So it's very confusing. But it is available in some states and territories in the US. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly. That was brilliant. Really, really interesting. Thank you so much. So welcome back, Mike.
Thank you.
So thank you, both of you, for really interesting talks. We've got some questions. If anyone else has any questions, we've got about half an hour. So if you want to put your questions on, we'll work our way through them, and we'll introduce Evan now as well to be on the panel for you to answer the questions. So I'll read them out, and then hopefully you'll have some interesting thoughts on them. So first question is from Marilyn. She says, I believe from March, high street CBD oils will no longer be allowed to have any THC content. Please, could you speak a bit about the difference with the THC levels in CBD available that is medically prescribed? Well, I think we've covered that a little bit with novel foods. If you want to briefly answer that question, anyone? Mike?
Yeah, my understanding, and I'm not a lawyer, but the actual content of THC regulations has not changed and will not change after March. So you can have some THC in CBD oil, but virtually nothing. And as I say, it's less than 1 milligram of THC per container, which is effectively nothing in medical terms. So that's, and of course, in a medically prescribed cannabis, you can get very high CBD and very low THC, but generally speaking, the THC content, even on a high CBD oil, will be over that legal limit for over-the-counter usage. So for example, take Bedrolite, which is well known to many in the UK, that is 3 milligrams of THC for every 100 milligrams of CBD. So it's still very, very low THC, but that will be illegal if it's in a bottle that can, obviously, as a bottle that contains more than 1 mil, then it will have more than 1 milligram of THC in it. So so basically you get more THC in medical products, but it need not be a very high level. Many people will want a high CBD, low THC product, but it just wouldn't be, it'd be too high to be over the counter.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So a second question from, I think it's Sagar. The question is, why cannabis legislation when cannabis has and is still lawful? Question mark. Legalizing cannabis without decriminalization will lead to big corporate cannabis company dominating the market with THC-free CBD.
Well, cannabis is not lawful, except if it's prescribed as a medicine. Otherwise, it's still in Schedule 1 and it can't be smoked under any circumstances. So I'm afraid, I mean, that's a political point. Should it be generally legalized like it is in Canada is a separate socio-political debate, which I think we ought to have in this country. But at the moment, it's not legal. And the only legal way of obtaining cannabis is through a prescription from a doctor on the specialist register.
I just want to talk with regard to the point about decriminalisation and sort of big cannabis companies and things like that. Obviously, I come from a position of being the parent of a severely unwell child who will never in his lifetime be able to grow or extract his own cannabis products himself because he is disabled. I want him to have safe, quality products available to him on prescription, and that's my right as his parent, and that's his right as a patient in this country now because it's legal. And I think decriminalisation, I know there's lots of people that, and as Mike said, that's a discussion for another time, but actually I am yet to be convinced that that keeps people safe, actually, because all that means is that you are not going to get in trouble if you're growing it or extracting it yourself. It doesn't mean that people like my child are safe if they are using products that have come from someone, because they're not going to be I think not going to be arrested. I think it's a very difficult conversation. It's not probably one for now, but for me, that's my opinion with regard to when people say, oh, but legalizing it causes big cannabis to take over. Well, I don't want to see the pharmaceuticalization of cannabis in the sense that we should have it available to us. I don't believe that randomized controlled trials is the only way of seeing evidence. So in that sense, I don't agree with that. But what I do agree with is safe, quality products being available to people who are disabled, and that's the only way they can get them, is if it's provided to them by companies who know what they're doing and are making good quality products.
Yeah, Hannah, if I can comment on that, it's a really good point because, well, first of all, to everybody, because I'm Dr. Evan Lewis. I'm a pediatric neurologist from Toronto, Canada, and I have had quite some experience with medical cannabis here and with my patients. Coming to that point though, Hannah, it's really important because in Canada, and this is one of the beauty of doing a panel like this with an international perspective in a country that's been dealing with this for some time. As the cannabis laws emerged in Canada, it was first legalized medically and then became legalized recreationally subsequent to that. And when the act was passed to legalize cannabis in Canada recreationally, it created two arms. There was a medical cannabis arm, or there is a medical cannabis arm and a recreational cannabis arm, and they're completely separate. And they're governed by different regulations and different laws around both access in both those sides. But as that emerged, there was an interesting kind of small group actually on the medical political side, interestingly enough, that essentially said, well, because it's all legal recreationally now, then let's just get rid of the medical aspect of it and people can just access it recreationally. And then there were people, on the pediatric side who recognized almost immediately that, well, you can't really do that. Then what's going to happen to all the children who need access to this medicine who can't access it because you have to be 18 or 19 and older in Canada to access it on the recreational side. And then what happens are all of the aspects that you just pointed out in terms of safety, quality, and good products for children, let alone patients. And it was a funny little interesting weird debate that kind of came out that seemed very nonsensical. So it's something that to share to the UK that this is definitely a path you don't want to take. It says it's very important to have the medical side separated from whatever evolves in this, from a recreational, decriminalization, legalization, etc. It's very, very important to have those separated out and treat them accordingly with the respect that both sides deserve.
Thank you, Evan. That's really helpful to actually hear your thoughts when you've been through it. And obviously for me, it's very personal. So I probably, sorry if I have a little rant, but obviously for me, protecting my child and keeping him safe is very important. And obviously I work with a huge amount of parents who are in the same boat. And absolutely, you're right, that if we have a position where we just decriminalise cannabis and say, get on with it, then what about people who really do need access to prescriptions? They are forgotten, and that's simply not fair. So,
and it's the same on the physician side too. We need that infrastructure in place in order to prescribe it properly, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
thank you. So we have a question from Daisy. Please, can you explain how it is decided which products are available through private clinics in the UK? Who makes those decisions? What are the barriers to products coming into the UK market? Mike, you probably want to answer that.
As far as I'm aware at the moment, there's about 12 producers, give or take a couple, who have products available in the UK through private clinics. Now, some private clinics have some products available, other private clinics have other products available. So not all products are available through all clinics, and that's just a commercial decision from the clinic. Are there barriers to coming in? Well, there are barriers in the sense it's sometimes not easy. It depends what product you want to get in and whether there's a need in the UK. You need what's called a letter of intent from a doctor to say this product would meet an unmet need effectively. It has to be GMP standard. So there are some barriers, but as far as I'm aware, no product has been turned down to get into the UK that was of GMP standard at the present time. What we do need, just to divert slightly, is a UK cannabis industry, because then all these importing Brexit type problems, we still want foreign products in the UK, sure, but getting our own homegrown products, that would avoid all these importation difficulties. And there are people in the UK who are farmers who are wanting to grow high THC cultivation, not hemp. There's a few licenses available now, mainly for research purposes and for GW, but others are coming along, hopefully, when the Home Office puts getting its act together. The other licenses were available and have a UK industry, which would help solve some of those importation issues.
What I would say quickly on that as well, though, is if you do get prescribed from a clinic and there is a different dispensary stocking a product that you would like, and your doctor deems that that product is the correct product for your child or you yourself, you are within your right to ask for your prescription, and you can then send it to whichever dispensary you want. So you will be encouraged to use the dispensary that's linked to the private clinic that you're going to. But you do have a right to have your own prescription, and you could take it to Boots if you wanted to. It's unlikely it will be dispensed, but you do have the right to have that prescription, and you can take it to any dispensary and with the product that you want, if it's not available through the particular clinic that you're with. So the next question is Amy. Is now the right time to pursue a private CBD prescription with possible Brexit restrictions, or is it worth waiting a few months to see what happens? Well, the Brexit restrictions obviously affected me personally. That was to do with Bedrolite that comes from the Netherlands. So there are other high CBD products, if this is for epilepsy, available for prescription through private clinics that aren't affected by Brexit, and that issue that we're still trying to find a long-term solution for. So I would say there's no time like the present. If that's what you want to do, I wouldn't worry about Brexit, because you know, hopefully we'll sort the issue with Bedrolite, but there are other products available. So next question is from Philippa. I have hypermobility spectrum disorder. I am so pleased to hear that someone with the same condition has benefited from medical cannabis. I think it's going to be a while before I'm able to access it myself, but this has filled me with hope. I also want to take the opportunity to say thank you to everyone involved for helping to get medical cannabis fully legalised. Well, thank you, Philippa. That's very lovely. That's a lovely message. Thank you. Freya, I have just been prescribed medical cannabis and have a question about my prescription. Okay, I don't think we can answer questions about prescriptions, can we, guys? We're not really allowed to answer patient queries about prescriptions, but if you want to pop it on in email to us, I'm sure we could deal with it, but I don't think we're able to do that, are we, Mike?
I think it would just be a bit too personal for the large audience, so we can answer if you drop us a quick note, Freya. That would be fine. We'll do our best to answer it. We can't answer it in detail because we're not your doctor, but we can do our best to answer it. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got an anonymous attendee here. Well, that sounds exciting, doesn't it? What does a clinician have to consider when prescribing medical cannabis to those with personality disorders or mood disorders when treating a secondary condition such as chronic pain, anxiety or depression as the primary condition seeking treatment through the use of medical cannabis?
Does Evan or Kelly want to answer that? I'm happy to, but
yeah, I'm happy to as well. And then Mike, you can add anything there if you feel that it's worth it. Right off the bat, I would say, you know, given that this is primarily psychological, psychiatric in origin, your best bet is to find a medical cannabis practitioner who has psychiatric expertise and expertise in psychiatric medications, because there could be a lot of concurrent medications that one is on. That would be my kind of top level answer there. I do, as a neurologist, see many people who have personality disorders or or other mental health issues combined. And then, you know, I'm treating headache, or I'm treating pain and post-concussion syndrome, for instance, as an example. So for that, you know, it depends really, and from my point of view, on the stability of the psychological profile. If it's within, I feel, my area of expertise, I'm okay to then go forward. If not, then I might ask a colleague to weigh in and help there. My point being is, I would say it's not an absolute no, you know, at all, but it has to be taken into context with the particular patient, and knowing that cannabis can affect mood in many directions, just like other medications. Depending on, again, the stability of those associated psychological factors, you have to weigh that against what we're actually treating and look at the risks. So it's a bit of a vague, broad answer, but I think it's the smarter one and the safer one to go about it in that way.
Okay. Anything to add, anyone else?
No, that's great.
Okay. So Michael, Hannah, I also want to say thank you for everything you've done towards legislation. Thank you, Michael. That's very kind of you. I'm just wondering, some clinics refuse to prescribe some brands on the basis that it's not part of their formulary. Then they push other companies' brands. Is it legal for them to be doing this?
I'm not sure about the legality, but some clinics are linked to some producers. And therefore they only want the doctor to prescribe their brand. I think it's fair to say, well, that's a legal thing to do. I don't think much of it, in the sense that I think doctors do need a choice of different brands and different varieties, if you like, different ratios and everything else. So I think it's better for a clinic to have a range of product on their formulary. A doctor, most doctors would wish to prescribe something that's right for the patient and not right for the clinic. But it's certainly true that some clinics have a limited formulary range, but many of them do have a very large formulary range. So it's a matter of finding the right clinic that might suit you, really.
So thank you, Mike. A question from Dirchio, I think it is. Thank you guys for this, loving the information. I've been a patient since June last year from Jersey in the Channel Islands. How would I go about taking some sort of course or diploma in this field, as I would like to get into and expand my knowledge, but also in a position where I can help other patients? Is there a reputable place I can genuinely learn more?
It does answer the UK. We do need courses and diplomas, but I think Canada, the States, are much further advanced than we are. There's one-day courses. There's going to be a course for the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society soon, as the Academy of Medical Cannabis. But to learn more about the totality of cannabis cultivation and extraction, the one that I took myself actually was called Green Flower, but that's one of many, and I'm sure our colleagues from across the Atlantic will perhaps knows something that's recommended in more advanced cannabis cultures than I have. But the Green Flower courses I found were very good. A cultivation course, there was an extraction course, there's a medical course. So that's just one example, in fairness, that's very good. There are others that are more medically orientated. But I'll pass over to Kelly or Evan.
Sorry, I was just going to say quickly, there's a company called Sativa Learning that's in Ireland as well, that's just launched
Ryan
CBD.
Ryan will kill me, as I did a couple of those modules with Ryan. Sativa Learning, very good. Yeah. Sorry, Ryan, if you're listening. That's a very good course designed for CBD professionals, as you said.
Yeah, but it's worth doing, if in general anyway, if you want to learn more. It's a good course. So sorry, Evan and Kelly.
Yeah. So in Canada, there's a lot of medical association sponsored type of courses for physicians. And personally, I don't know any particular courses for patients or kind of general population that I could recommend offhand or have any experience with. But it is something, as a note to the UK, that obviously we need to develop.
Yeah, we need to do. That's another thing for MedCann support to do. Right. Matt, put it on your list.
Yeah, I think there are emerging courses in Canada and the US also that are put on by different universities. And, you know, now because of the pandemic, there's a lot more distance learning, so virtual learning as well. So, I mean, that's kind of a cop-out answer, but to check online to see what that is, because there's more and more of them offered all the time through reputable, you know, post-secondary education institutes and universities. That would be universities or colleges.
Thank you, Kelly. That's really helpful. Charles, is it true that all NHS prescriptions are signed off by a the minister at the Department of Health?
No, thank goodness it's not. I can't even imagine possibly a politician minister signing off all prescriptions. I mean, goodness sake. No, a prescription from a doctor is valid. The doctor has to get a sort of what's called a multidisciplinary team approval. So one or two other doctors have to just check the prescription, which is actually, it's a very helpful system, particularly for a new prescribing doctor. But once that team, if you like, has signed off the prescription, then it just goes to the pharmacy and is prescribed. There's no other checks that it has to go through. The controlled drug prescription does go to a central body who logs them, but they don't have they don't say yes or no to the prescription itself.
Okay, so anonymous person as well. Is it okay to take CBD and THC together with a benzodiazepine? Would the CBD increase blood levels of the benzo? Well, me personally, my son takes a very small dose of benzodiazepine, has done for a long time, and has done with CBD and THC, and it has not affected his blood levels at all. It's very individual. Some people can take high doses of benzo and high doses of CBD and it cause problems. Some people do and it doesn't. I think it's a very individual thing, to be honest. I know that Epidiolex was licensed to be used with a benzodiazepine because I think some doctors thought that that's why it was so helpful, because the benzodiazepine levels increased, but that's not what I've seen in my child and not what I think many other people see. But it'd be interesting to hear what, Evan, if you have an opinion on that as well.
So I think broadly across it does increase specifically clobazam and some of the other benzodiazepine levels, and so for my patients, everybody has baseline blood work, especially if they're, and then including levels of clobazam if they're on that, and it's important to monitor through treatment because in the context of medical cannabis treated benzodiazepines, you can get additional sedating effects, and that can be, you know, detrimental to development and whatnot. So it's important to monitor those. But I agree, Hannah. There certainly is genetic variation amongst individuals. That some will have that interaction occur at more significant levels than others, for sure. And it also depends on the doses of everything. Yeah, right. Exactly. The dose of the clobazam. It also depends on other anti-epileptic drugs that are involved, and it also depends on the amount of cannabis that's being used too. Yeah,
definitely. It's very, very individual, isn't it? Really, depending on how someone's body is responding.
Right. It also gets really complicated especially in complex epilepsy, because it's usually not just one benzodiazepine and medical cannabis. It's usually 3 other drugs in addition to that. So then you have something like phenytoin or dilantin or carbamazepine, otherwise known as Tegretol. Those come on board, and those do the opposite effect. So then you got opposite effect, this effect, that effect. So it's really important that, and again, this is my little plug here for it's so important that specialists are the ones who are prescribing medical cannabis in that area, because it's not just about giving medical cannabis to people and saying goodbye. And, you know, you have to really know what you're dealing with these patients, because you know, the patients are complex, and there's a whole host of other factors, especially in something like epilepsy, where you have to have a good grounded knowledge in epilepsy and all of its medications to properly prescribe, monitor, and be safe with medical cannabis, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally agree with that. So question from Amy: do those prescribing privately for uncontrolled epilepsy in a child expect you to have exhausted all other options, i.e. should you have tried Epidiolex and had the VNS?
In the UK, no, you don't have to exhaust all other options. Some medical bodies like the BPNA would suggest you do. The BPNA, for example, even if you're working, wants you to swap over to Epidiolex, but I think is appalling. It's reasonable, and the controlling bodies would say you should have tried at least 2 licensed medications. That's not in the law, but that's a suggestion. Some would say you need to try more than that, but you don't have to have tried everything. You don't have to have tried Epidiolex, and you don't have to have tried VNS because it might not be suitable for you, or ketogenic diet might not be suitable. So there's no compulsion to try those things, but there is some compulsion to have tried at least some licensed medications before trying an unlicensed cannabis medication.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And just one last thing, Mike, is it's not only about trying keto, trying VNS. It's about being able to get those things. That's an access issue. So one would then wait several months plus a surgery plus a recovery, and then try cannabis. It's a bit unrealistic.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Thank you. So another question here: are there some children for whom CBD and/or THC just doesn't work? My daughter is 32 and has been trying medical cannabis for a year now, using different ratios of CBD to THC, but there has been no effect on her pain.
I'll take a stab at that too. So absolutely, for sure. And that's the idea, is at least the opportunity to try it is there, and I think that's what's important, right? And something like pain is a very complex condition that has multiple different factors that come into play when we're treating pain. So one thing when I'm treating pain or treating post-concussion syndrome, chronic headache, etc., it's not just medical cannabis. Medical cannabis is one tool I have in my toolkit of different resources as a neurologist to treat pain. So and I can't emphasize more the importance of having a psychologist on board and dealing with the mental health aspects that come with chronic pain that needs to be addressed. And I sometimes say to patients, look, this is what medical cannabis might do for you. It might catalyze your therapy, because really the therapy is really what's going to work for long-lasting, sustainable changes. If you learn that aspect of your pain, about how to deal with the mental health element of it, well, you got to learn that, because that's going to have some long-term sustainable effects, in addition to dealing with the actual physical pain that you're dealing with. So, I think a physician has to have a holistic approach to something like this when we're dealing with pain. But again, dealing with any kind of condition, it should be looked at from a holistic lens. And in this sense, so you try medical cannabis, it might not work, it might not be for you, but there are other aspects of the care model that have to come into play and might be the predominant one.
Okay, thank you. A question from Amy: in terms of using CBD for severe uncontrolled epilepsy in children, over time, will the body get used to it? Do we know if it's a long-term solution?
So I'll take another stab at that one. I think the answer is we don't know. We really don't, because we're still understanding exactly why cannabis works in epilepsy. It seems to work really, really well in some cases, kind of well in others, and not well at all in some cases. And so that really speaks to the underlying reason why someone might have epilepsy. So I think that question is a big question mark, and something that we're going to further continue to evolve. I do see, just like other anti-epileptic medications, there can be a wearing off effect. But in other people who are very precise responders, tend not to wear off. So that tells me, in that latter group, probably the underlying mechanism for the epilepsy is deeply rooted in the endocannabinoid system. And in this sense, that we don't get that wearing off effect, whereas other epilepsies, maybe the endocannabinoid system is partially responsible for it. So I think it's a big question mark that needs to be answered kind of in the future, and we'll have more and more knowledge as time passes.
Definitely. I think it would be amazing to understand why that happens sometimes, because it does happen sometimes. And there just isn't the understanding yet as to why it does with some children, doesn't with others, or adults, whatever. And that would be so interesting to start to try and understand that for doctors and for obviously for parents and patients. So next question is from Therese. Is there any plans to introduce the endocannabinoid system to the medical undergraduate curriculum in the UK? Well, there should be.
There should be. Sadly, the undergraduate curriculum is not centrally determined. So it's up to each individual university and medical school to determine what they teach their students. So oddly, there's no governmental or overarching body that says you will teach this and this and this. So it's up to individual medical schools. It's rarely taught. There's a big problem. There's endless turf wars over curriculums. If we want to introduce something else has to give, and no one else wants to give up their little bit of the curriculum. But it is, sadly, I do hope it is really, really important, and I hope it's introduced more widely in medical undergraduate curriculum, but there is no law that says it can be, because there's no overarching body that determines that.
It is something that the Society are currently looking at, is creating our own medical cannabis curriculum content, which we're going to try and partner with the university and look at how we can do that, because it is really, really important and it's not happening at the moment. So right, next question from Anonymous. Mike mentioned going to your GP to ask them to prescribe this for you, but isn't there a list of permitted prescribers, mainly neurologists, who are only specialists who can prescribe?
It's true. There's not a list of permitted prescribers. Well, I suppose there is, in the sense that it's any doctor on what's called the specialist register of the GMC that can initiate the prescription. So that's basically that's hospital consultants, neurologists, pediatricians, pain doctors. So GPs cannot initiate the prescription. GPs can initiate it in the sense of making a referral to a clinic or referral to a specialist to do it. And then GPs are perfectly allowed legally to do a follow-up prescription under the direction of the specialist. So the specialist has to start it, but the GP can continue it. But sadly, there's only 3 GPs in the country, as I said earlier, that are doing that at the moment for 3 patients. So that's the legal position.
Okay, thank you, Mike. There's an anonymous question here. Are there thresholds for yeasts and mold for products sold in the UK? Or is there? I think Kelly wants to answer that. Yeah, I was going to say if Kelly answers that.
Yeah,
with
you
regard
can't
to
have any mold in the product. So I think
that's.
that's.
So I myself, I'm not sure of what's legally mandated. I don't think there is anything legally mandated in the UK, but I would say that common practice is that there should be none. However, there are acceptable limits for those types of we can say contaminants like yeast and mold and things like that, and that you can find them in other products as well. And so I wouldn't say that there is an established threshold. That might be something to look into as part of the whole activity around establishing standards for products in the UK. Certainly in Canada, there are acceptable limits and tolerances for those.
Thank you. Just to say, we're nearly at 7:30. We've got 15 questions left. Is everyone happy to plough on through quickly and get them finished so we can make sure we answer everyone's questions? Yeah. Okay. So Alexander, question from Alexander. Should we be looking for UK cultivated products? What are the advantages of these? Well, there currently aren't any.
Currently aren't any. Let's see, so you can look for them, but we won't find them. I think, as I said earlier, we do need a UK medical cannabis industry. Of that, I have no doubt at all. The advantages, of course, are severalfold. One is the supply chain. We wouldn't be problems with Brexit importing and such like. So we'd have our own products. And also, of course, post-COVID, it will produce an industry. Industries produce jobs. And produce tax benefit. I know I've never thought I'd promote tax to the government, but nevertheless, I think it's better to put tax in the hands of the government than in the hands of the criminals in the black market, sadly, although not everyone, there's some good people in the black market, in fairness. But I think a UK industry is a very useful thing, particularly post-Brexit and post-COVID. But it isn't there yet. We need to campaign for it.
Thank you. So, Jeffrey, is it correct that the endocannabinoid system was only discovered in the human body in the 1980s?
Yeah, the history there is quite interesting. So a lot of that work did come out of the 80s and the early 90s, actually. By the time the different aspects of the endocannabinoid system, for those who don't know, I think it was alluded to, those are molecules in the brain and receptors in the brain and elsewhere throughout the body that control a lot of fundamental processes in our body and comprise the system called the endocannabinoid system. And it just so happens that molecules like THC and CBD and the others in cannabis also act on this system. So yeah, a lot of that work emerged in the 80s and the early 90s, and then kind of came together as this idea around that time.
Okay, thank you.
And it's still
Sorry,
evolving.
Kelly.
And I just want to know, it's still evolving. I mean, there's still a lot of knowledge, a lot of research in the area. So it's not, the field is still open and there's a lot of activity happening there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Michael, I have a private prescription. I've had a private prescription, sorry, since December last year. It's very expensive. Is my GP any more likely to prescribe me cannabis based on the fact that it's working for me with little side effects now that I've already been using it successfully?
Well, sadly, as we said earlier, your GP can't prescribe it primarily. If you're getting a private prescription and it's working, it will be legal for the GP to continue that prescription on the NHS. It's just at the moment they're not. But at the moment it would have to be under the direction of the prescribing specialist, but it would be entirely legal for your GP to do it. So go and ask him or her and see what they say, and then try and get a good answer as to why they won't do it.
Freya, a question from Freya. Does medicinal cannabis have an effect on levothyroxine medication, or is it in any way contraindicated? Yeah.
No, not in my opinion. No, thyroid dysfunction is fine. I mean, again, it's, you got to take into context how, you know, this is referring to somebody who would have a thyroid problem. So you'd have to, again, have an understanding of what that is, but there's no interaction with levothyroxine, so you're fine, and fine with thyroid dysfunction to use medical cannabis, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, agree.
Professor
One at the top there, Hannah.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just doing the order because
vestibular migraine.
I know, but that was
sorry.
asked after.
Okay,
So
I beg your pardon. I shouldn't interfere, Hannah.
I'm just asking.
I'm going to go on mute now.
I'm going to switch you off now. Professor Mike, if terpenes provide the strong smell of cannabis, therefore, if the terpenes are reduced or removed, then will the medical cannabis have the same relief for pain overall effect? So I suppose this is about smell. So if the strong smell of cannabis is an issue, if they're removed, will they still work?
I think all I would say for that is, if it doesn't smell, it probably is that there's none or virtually no terpenes left in the product. What we which can't answer with any certainty, is whether those terpenes will aid the therapeutic benefit of the other cannabinoids in there. I think they probably do, and there are some terpenes I think are medically very useful, like myrcene for sedation or linalool for epilepsy, but we can't say that with definitively yet, because the research just isn't there. I would personally prefer cannabis that does have a smell and therefore does have a full spectrum terpenoid profile, personally.
Yeah. Okay. So another question here. I've seen some commercial products for minor cannabinoids like CBG and CBN that are now made from limonene. How would that need to be labelled, as broad spectrum or synthetic? Kelly, is that something you know about?
That's an interesting question. I mean, the whole area of so-called minor cannabinoids is evolving. There are companies who are trying to produce it and scale it up in other organisms, like yeast or algae or things like that, to focus in on those cannabinoids that are produced in smaller quantities naturally in the cannabis plant. So they're usually kind of a cross between, it's called biosynthesis. So they're biologically produced, but they're synthesized for a purpose. And then, of course, there are other companies, I'm sure, that are producing them synthetically as well. So it really depends on the product itself. And again, there's research emerging in the area and looking at applications of this. I mean, first and foremost, I would say there's more work in the preclinical area, looking at cells and things like that, to really characterize minor cannabinoids and understand how they work biologically. But certainly, I mean, there are, like I said, other companies that are trying to produce this in mass quantities. So it really depends on the product itself and what that is.
Lovely, thank you. So I have vestibular migraine. Nobody mentioned THC to me. Is it because there's no research? All of the medication for migraine are banned for my myasthenia gravis, but GP doesn't give me any options. Well, they won't, sadly, I don't think, because they're not allowed to prescribe cannabis and they don't know about it. Yeah.
There is some research on migraine. There's cannabis kind of bought a migraine attack. It's not very robust research, but certainly for people with very intractable migraine, I think it's worth trying cannabis, a vape, particularly for a bought attack if it's predictably onset. I don't know if Evan would agree with that, but the research is very limited on migraine, but it's certainly there.
There's a couple of good surveys that have come out for actually migraine prevention. And it looks like a combination of low-dose CBD and some THC over a period of several weeks to a few months can result in reduced migraine severity, reduced migraine disability, and fewer migraine days.
Lovely, thank you. Question from Morgan: can a patient request products to be certified in the UK?
Yes, and should do. I think patients who take it should have the advantage of what Kelly showed us of a good quality certificate analysis, so they know what they're taking and know what's in it. Absolutely. And we can all learn from it. So yes, I think I would demand a certificate of analysis, to be honest. Yes,
definitely. A statement here from Kyle: it's worth pointing out that while CBD oils have received attention for THC content, the majority of hemp seed oils contain more than 1 milligram of controlled substances per container. This remains unexplained in UK law, as novel foods exemption is no exemption from the Misuse of Drugs Act. If you can find a hemp seed oil with less than 1 milligram of THC, it will usually contain more than 1 milligram of CBN.
Yeah, I don't know if I can't work out what the question is in that one.
It's not really a question.
Thank you, Kyle.
I think it's a statement.
All I can say is at the moment, the law is that if the container contains more than 1 milligram of THC, it's illegal to be sold over the counter, but it's perfectly legal to prescribe it.
Okay. A question from Rob: have any studies been done regarding blood types and their potential differing interactions with various cannabinoids and/or chemobars?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think so. I've not read anything of different blood types, and if Kelly or Evan have, but I haven't.
No, I don't think that there is, but I mean, there might be studies ongoing or things like that.
Yeah, not blood type, but certainly potential gene markers, right? Depending on what kind of genetics you have in order to metabolize things like cannabis. And that's a big evolving field in cannabis right now for everybody to know. It's called pharmacogenomics, which is, utilized very much so in other areas of pharmacy medicine, but this is also an emerging field in cannabis to understand. And Hannah, this comes back to what you mentioned before about how different people metabolize the benzodiazepines in the context of CBD or cannabis, right? This is the same idea. And I think probably going forward in the future, we'll have good blood tests out there that will give us some fast indication of how one metabolizes cannabis, which will help us decide about ratios in treatment and how much CBD versus some of the others, how much of some of the others versus CBD, et cetera.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I would think that it's part of the whole field of personalized healthcare or personalized medicine. I think that was first came about when we're talking about cancer treatment, because that could be very individual. And so I think it speaks to this evolving field of personalized healthcare. And I think one of the best, applicable fields to that is medical cannabis field, because, you do get different metabolism of people and which Evan just spoke about, but you get different efficacy and different, other kinds of systemic effects. And so understanding how that may work in individual patients or subsets of patients, I think is really important, and also an evolving field.
Thank you. So Elisabetta, hello Elisabetta, lovely, thank you for joining us. Legislation in Australia since has led to 90,000 prescriptions, mainly in the last 18 months, and most companies aren't big corporations, but started by people who believe in the efficiency of medical cannabis for conditions with limited alternative treatment, who are focused on quality and standardization. The same will be true in the UK as long as pressure keeps being put on the NHS and NICE to free up authorisations for prescriptions. I completely agree with that, and that's been my experience as well, that there's some amazing people in this space who are doing amazing work for the right reasons to help people like my child, and many millions of people like that who will benefit, and that's what gives me hope for the future, actually, is that there's, you know, many good people who are trying to do the right thing in the UK. And thank you for that statement, and we'll hopefully see 90,000 prescriptions in the UK in the next few years. That would be good. So Mike, can you see the questions?
Yes.
Can you mention the one from Raquel, because there's no way on earth I can read the
this
you
was
read
just
it, because this is the doctor's notes and I can't. I don't know what it is.
Well, I don't know if I was hoping you'd do that, because I can't pronounce some of those at the bottom there. It says, I'd like to invite my colleagues to change the term intoxicating applied to THC. This term reinforces the stigma. All substances can produce an intoxication depending on dosage. I recommend to use other terms: psycholeptic, psychodyspeptic, psychotomimetic. I got there. I agree with you. I don't think it's the right term. It's sort of said that THC is psychoactive and CBD isn't. That isn't right, because CBD is psychoactive in the sense that it acts on the brain. Intoxicating isn't quite right, because it has images of drunk behavior. There isn't quite the right word. So I do agree with you. I think I would not use psychotomimetic, because no one can pronounce it or spell it. But to be serious, Raquel, thank you. We need a new word for it, because it's a word that it gets you high isn't quite right either, because that has all the recreational connotations. So I think you're absolutely right. Intoxicating isn't right, but I can't think what is.
I think, so this is good. I talk about this a lot. So most teaching that I do for the general public is about articulating exactly what we're trying to say and using the right words. And that is so important. So I agree, Raquel, it's right. But at the same time, we have to also find the right word to describe the effects of too much THC. It can be really bad. That can be psychologically traumatic for somebody if you have a significant panic attack under the influence of THC. So that's a possibility that can happen. So I think yes, we want to dispel stigma, but we also don't want to I guess, you know, create an illusion that cannabis is completely 100% safe, because any medication, as Mike mentioned, has its side effects. So for that, yeah, we have to find the right word potentially to describe that. And I would just say, well, what do we use for other medicines? And maybe that's the kind of word we should jump at. So adverse effect could be an important word. But for the getting high type of feeling, I often use euphoric and non-euphoric. And euphoria is a good word. If you look at, this is what I love doing. I like showing the drug monograph of the opiates. You show the drug monograph of the opiates, and under the positive effects of opiates is listed euphoria. So of course, if you are in serious pain, or you have a cancer and you're recovering, you might want to feel a little euphoric. That might be a nice side effect of an opiate. It actually might be a therapeutic effect, which it is, of the opiate. So yes, it is so the euphoria in cannabis is certainly a therapeutic effect. However, when you read about it, it's always listed as a negative adverse consequence of cannabis use, is the euphoria. So it's very, very interesting, and it's really important that we're using the right term. So I like to separate things out, and I call CBD a non-euphoric cannabinoid, and I call THC a euphoric cannabinoid in that sense. And certainly too much euphoria is a heightened sense of emotion. So you certainly can get a heightened positive sense of emotion, but you can also get a heightened negative sense of emotion. And that's the significant anxiety that can come out of excessive use of THC. So there's certainly a fine line. Euphoria might be a word that will help kind of separate these things. But it's a great debate. It's a great discussion. I actually really enjoy that discussion around cannabis.
Okay. Finally, we have 2 questions to go. Thank you everyone for staying a bit later. So from Faye, are you aware of any clinicians prescribing cannabis products getting any pushback from the medical indemnity providers and having to seek alternative cover, i.e. are the medical defence organisations open to this as an area of potentially emerging risk, given the issues that have been experienced around the prescription of opioids?
Yes is the answer. It's a very unsatisfactory field. I've had doctors who have asked their medical defense organization and they've said, yeah, that's fine, carry on, because it's a legal product and why shouldn't it be okay to carry on? And others have had a pushback to say, no, we're not covering you for cannabis, which I think is just wrong. It's like any other medicine that's legal. And then we've had others who say, well, we'll cover you, but we'll charge you for a clinic. We had one quote, I'm told, that was for £2,000 per clinic. So of course the doctor didn't do it because they'd actually lose money. So yeah, it's a very unsatisfactory field, but we do, through the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, have links now. If there's a doctor out there asking that question, we do have links with a provider who is prepared to cover the doctor indemnity-wise through the society. So contact the society and we can put you in touch with that particular insurance indemnity provider.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. And a final question. Jersey has just given Northern Leaf a license to grow high THC medical cannabis, but only for export. Why do countries do this?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I think Northern Leaf should, I don't know the detail of the Northern Leaf, of course, but I can't see why it shouldn't. If it's a good product, why shouldn't it be used for the good people of Jersey as well as the good people of the rest of the world? I don't know why countries do that. I don't know if that's correct, actually, Dercio, but you may be right, but I didn't think that was correct. But I stand to be corrected.
Okay. Wow, that's it. Thank you ever so much to Dr. Evan Lewis, Kelly Noreen, and Professor Mike Barnes. Thank you to the Jamaican Medical Cannabis Corporation for sponsoring tonight's event. Thank you to the Society, MedCann support, and to our darling Kate Thorpe, the Communications Director at the Society, who's helped us to put this on this evening. Thank you to all of you and for all your questions. And thank you for staying another 15 minutes later. So hopefully we were all riveting for you. It was lovely to see you, and thank you for the 3 events. They've been really well attended. They've been really, really good. I've enjoyed all of them. So thank you to everyone who's been part of that. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you.